Iowa's News Now, celebrating 70 years of Eastern Iowa's history. Now, here's your host, Nick Weig.
Good evening, and welcome to our celebration tonight of 70 years of television right here in this studio at Broadcast Park. There are so many incredible history-making moments that happened in this building over the last 70 years, and we're going to share some of them with you tonight. But we thought it'd be best to begin with the man who started it all, William B. Quarton.
This is a great day for us, and I hope it is for you too.
As station manager and founder of what was then WMT-TV, Quarton was the first person to welcome Eastern Iowa to television. But it was not an easy road to get there.
We had saved up. We had quite a little pot saved up, but not enough. So I went to my banker here to try to get an extra $300,000, and I couldn't get it.
Quarton went all the way to Minneapolis to get the funds he needed, and construction began right away. Not along the busy thoroughfare Broadcast Park is a neighbor to now, but a farm field on the outskirts of Cedar Rapids.
The big news tonight concerns the WMT television antenna, because today they began raising the antenna sections to the top of the tower.
That day would come September 30th, 1953, which just happened to be the same day as Game 2 of the World Series between the Brooklyn Dodgers and New York Yankees. But NBC had the broadcast rights to the World Series, and Broadcast Park would be a CBS affiliate. So Quarton sent sales manager Lou Van Nostrand to New York to ask permission to air the game. NBC said yes for $5,000. Van Nostrand remembered Quarton's reaction.
Where do you propose to get the $5,000? And I said, well, that's your problem. That's not mine.
Quarton says NBC never asked for their money, and he never reminded them.
It was a wonderful business, and still is.
And we couldn't agree more. In those first days and weeks of broadcasting in 1953, we launched our first newscast, bringing you local news, weather, and sports. In the spirit of Weather First, we thought we'd begin there, including the story of our first meteorologist and how he forever changed the landscape of meteorology across the country. In the early days, it was radio personalities that delivered the forecast from the Shell Weather Tower. Of course, it was just a platform in the studio. But in the late 50s, managers got the idea of hiring someone who knew how to forecast the weather. So in 1957, Channel 2 decided to get a real meteorologist by the name of Conrad Johnson.
Good evening, everyone. It appears now that our rain is not going to arrive as far in any appreciable...
Fresh off his active duty in the Navy, those first newscasts were beyond basic, with an art easel and Conrad sitting on a stool drawing his maps.
So you were just writing on
a poster paper, kind of like poster paper, colored poster paper.
By the 1960s, the process got more advanced with pre-built maps and...
You used shoe polish on the boards, and you could go out and prepare, 10 minutes before you went on air.
The 60s also saw a major revolution in weather forecasting, and much of it was born here at Broadcast Park. After the Palm Sunday tornado outbreak in 1965 killed hundreds and injured thousands more across several states, Conrad convened a meeting of weather leaders from across the country here at Broadcast Park to come up with a new way to cover dangerous storms.
We developed a watch and warning system, and it came in two stages. A watch was indicative that the conditions were favorable for development, and the warning came after somebody had sighted one.
Also in the mid-60s, we reached out to our neighbors at Collins Aerospace, then known as Rockwell Collins, to bring a new piece of weather technology from warplanes to viewers, radar.
They said, let's try this. Just put it up on the building and see if it'll work. And we did, and it worked.
At the present time, the radar shows a band of thunderstorms about 15 to 20 miles wide, extending from just west of Manchester, southwestward down through about Shellsburg, west of the Lynn County line, and then on down in toward Williamsburg. Chicago had actually the first one. We were the first one west of Mississippi.
By the early 80s, the old radar gave way to a new Doppler radar.
I still think it's probably one of the best displays because it simplified what was going on in the atmosphere for viewers. But it was an exciting time because computer technology was really coming into play.
But more importantly, a Doppler radar network across the country could finally measure wind speed and direction in a storm, witnessing the formation of a tornado and providing warnings before touchdown.
And it looks like this may be a very long night for us all indeed.
We're out here for hours on end. It really passes by pretty quick because you have no concept of time.
But with the rise of the internet, much of that information is now in the hands of anyone who wants it.
And in the original days, Conrad would, he had a shortwave radio. He could plot everything there as well. And by the end of my career here, people were calling me up saying, well, you didn't look at this model, or did you realize that this model was doing this? Go, really? Because it was available on the internet.
This is a multi-vortex wide tornado. You can see the entire mesocyclone on this tornado rotating.
And that's where putting experienced eyes in the field has now become more important than ever. Iowa's News Now has been able to bring you the formation of tornadoes live on the air.
Okay, shoot. Yeah, we're good. We lost the window.
And warn you before the unthinkable happens where you live. It is that educated expertise that you cannot take out of forecasting.
Once again, I'd like to mention that all the watches and the warnings have been canceled at this time. We are experiencing thunderstorms at the present time over much of the...
You know, as somebody who's been chasing storms for more than 20 years, I can tell you how important resources like the Road Warrior can be when tracking dangerous storms here in eastern Iowa. It is a reminder of the commitment of our past, present, and future to keep you safe. Still to come, the men and women that have brought you the news, both in good times and bad.
This is just a sign of how serious the situation is. Floodwaters rising at a rapid pace, and on top of that, we have this rainstorm that is just barreling down rain.
The faces you remember and the moments none of us will ever forget.
Can I ask you guys what you're dumping?
As we celebrate 70 years of television at Iowa's News Now.
Is somebody lining their pockets here?
Yeah, well, I don't know.
At the core of everything we do here at Broadcast Park is the people, including the people over the years that have brought you the news and the information that you need. Tonight, we want to go back to the beginning of news on television here in eastern Iowa and look through some of the major advancements that have happened over the last 70 years. The first newscast in 1953 was anchored by Bill Roberts, who had already spent years on radio. Bob Bruner, who just joined the staff, recalled how that first newscast, like so many after it, did not go as planned.
But the commercial was live, way at the other end of the studio. Well, the cameraman, we had two cameras, but this one cameraman had to go all the way down there and shoot that and then come back. We got ready to go on the air, and the cameraman came rushing back, and all of a sudden he said, "Somebody take over," and he fell on the floor, passed out.
Turns out, the cameraman's shoulder popped out of its socket, and he collapsed on the floor to pop it back in place. Still, the show went on. At that time, there was just one newscast at 6 o'clock. Later, Bruner hosted a second newscast at noon. While we enjoy 5 cameras in the studio today, back in the 50s, there was often only one.
And believe it or not, they would, I'd introduce a picture, and the camera would pan over to the picture and pan back to the newscaster and this type of thing.
In 1959, Dave Shea joined the staff and stuck around for a few decades, at first anchoring an evening newscast at 10:30.
She was not booked, but she was held overnight here in the Cedar Rapids City Jail.
In those days, the news, weather, and sports were all isolated segments with no interaction.
But all of that changed in 1960. This promotion picture shows Conrad, Tate, and I moving the 10:30 newscast to 10 o'clock and doing a much more integrated news, weather, and sports program, which we called Report to Iowa. I don't know that we originated it, but we were among the very first in the nation to adopt that kind of format, which is standard today.
But as technology began to take over and provide new and better ways of bringing information to the masses, that all began to change. The first seismic shift coming in the mid-60s, when the first color television cameras arrived.
Are you all set, Bob? Take it away in full spectrum color.
Well, Doug, first I'd like to say this, that I feel doubly honored to have been chosen to be the first one involved in our big change, because there are so many much more colorful characters around here than this reporter.
Another monumental change happened in the 70s when portable microwave transmitters led to the first live shots in eastern Iowa.
Stand by.
Okay, up on 2 and queuing.
A crude oil pipeline would run through several farms in northeastern Lynn County and right through a county park. Mike has a live Instacam report on the pipeline battle.
Dave, I'm reporting from the Maxwell Bridge County Park, the eastern part of Lynn County. It was the golden era.
John Bachman, who went on to a long career at WHO-TV in Des Moines, spent much of the 70s here, honing his craft by some of the best in the business.
Being able to co-anchor with Dave Shea was tremendous. I mean, he was a mentor and a close friend.
For 34 years, Eastern Iowans welcomed Dave Shea into their homes, but for countless colleagues, it was much more.
Was just an outstanding personality.
I was just a young 20-something reporter, and I just looked at him in awe.
It's a wonderful time in my career to be able to work alongside him and the rest of the team.
I grew up watching Channel 2, watching Dave Shea.
Dave retired in 1993. Now, at 94, Dave has spent 5 years without his beloved wife, losing her to memory loss. Unfortunately, now Dave himself is going through the same terrifying condition, but with the grace he's remembered for.
He's been a great model to us who know and love him for the way he's upbeat, even when he's experienced some, losses that are distressing to him that he can't remember much.
Despite all the changes over the decades, Dave Shea showed us one thing remains true: to do your best to find the truth and report it to Eastern Iowa. It is that foundation here at Broadcast Park that we continue to build on to the best of our ability. Still to come, 70 years of unforgettable stories, groundbreaking achievements, and innovating ways to help the place we call home.
I call to compliment you on what you're doing.
As Iowa's News Now celebrates 70 years of television. Some of the most impactful and memorable stories that we've ever told here are also the ones that we've been recognized for. One of those we're most proud of is this, the George Foster Peabody Award. Many consider it to be the most prestigious award in all of journalism. Few television stations are lucky to say that they have one. Broadcast Park has earned 2. In the mid-50s, Iowa's News Now worked with Rockwell Collins to develop a multi-part documentary educating Eastern Iowans about the secrets of flight. For the first time, a wind tunnel was seen in public to demonstrate how it all worked.
You might see it even better if I turn the blower down so that the whole field slows down and we see it in a slower motion.
The pioneering broadcast earned a George Foster Peabody Award, one of the most prestigious awards a news organization can earn.
Can I ask you guys what you're dumping?
Almost 40 years later, another Peabody, this time for uncovering the biggest case of government corruption in Iowa history, the Cedar Rapids sewer solvent scandal. Leaders were buying chemicals at massively inflated prices, all at the expense of taxpayers.
Intertrade was selling sewer solvent to the city for $27.50 a gallon. But Hydride of Waterloo will sell us a product that will accomplish the same job for just $1.80 a gallon.
Is somebody lining their pockets here?
Yeah, well, I don't know. I don't think so.
A number of people were lining their pockets and they went to prison for it.
Along the way, I'll be honest, there were a lot of threats, a lot of people who blamed me for ruining lives. But I guess the best day out of all of that was when everything went through the court system and one of the key players came out of court, and he came up to me and shook my hand and said, "I don't blame you. This was not your fault."
When accepting the Peabody, Sandy Riesgraff repeated something said the first time Broadcast Park earned a Peabody, nearly 40 years earlier.
We don't claim to have the highest tower, the most powerful transmitter, or even to have the most authoritative voice. But we know our neighbors watch and listen to us. And for this reason, more than any other, we do our best to say what's important.
What's important can oftentimes be very personal, including during the job crisis of the early 80s. Barry Norris and others at Broadcast Park had a unique idea.
Dump our primetime programming and let people step up to a camera and say, "Hi, my name's John Waller,
And my number is 7051, and I'm looking for work.
So unique, it got attention around the world. And from the leader of the free world.
I call to compliment you on what you're doing.
Some of the most talked about stories from the 90s featured a baby girl stuck between two families.
She wants her baby home where she belongs with her mother and her father.
Baby Jessica was given up for adoption at birth by her mother, but shortly after, she told the father what she had done, and he fought to get her back. After a 2-year battle, the little girl was taken away from the only parents she ever knew in Michigan and returned to her parents in eastern Iowa.
Heart-wrenching to watch that transfer because there were two families that loved this little girl, and she was 2.
And then there is Jody.
This is CityCast with Jody Husentruth.
Our former colleague here was on her way to anchor the morning news in Mason City when she vanished in 1995. To this day, there have been no signs of Jody and no clue as to who took her. 2001 brought one of the most devastating days in American history.
Today, our nation saw evil, the very worst of human nature, and we responded with the best of America.
The World Trade Center attacked by terrorists and destroyed in a matter of minutes.
It was all hands on deck.
The impacts far and wide, especially when air travel was halted for days.
And I was sent out to the airport, and it was just such a surreal experience, I remember, because the airport was completely empty.
Weather has always played a major role in the work we do, but never greater than some of the major disasters experienced in recent memory.
The railroad bridge has collapsed. It is now floating downstream in the Cedar River.
The flood of 2008 impacted hundreds of communities and devastated downtown Cedar Rapids, taking with it hundreds of businesses and thousands of homes.
Memories of my kids' pictures gone, probably. Everything's gone. It's really hard to deal with.
Even forcing Mercy Medical Center to shut down 10 blocks from the river.
That's so far away from the river. How did the water get down to 10th and 8th? You know, it's so far removed from the Cedar River.
And threatening to take the city's water supply with it, saved at the last moment by the residents themselves.
And I got back up there and there were just cars all over the place. Hundreds of cars, people coming out with shovels.
That's an amazing
There were
sight.
over 1,000 people there. They just showed up out of nowhere. And
to this day, Cedar Rapids is still working to defend itself from the next great flood. The pandemic and derecho of 2020 combined for a 1-2 punch of perseverance by eastern Iowa. Days without power in hot and humid conditions, all while trying to protect one another from a virus.
Because I had maybe an hour to 2 hours left to live.
That would eventually kill more than 1 million Americans. Still to come tonight, 70 years of sports at Broadcast Park. From the unexpected pioneer of the art form,
I have never seen a team that I thought more deserving,
to the incredible moments of Eastern Iowans winning on some of the biggest stages in sports. Also, a look at the future here at Broadcast Park and how it will benefit you as we celebrate 70 years at Iowa's News Now. Not only was the first broadcast on Channel 2 70 years ago the World Series, but the first locally produced program that day was sports as well. And it all started with the man that few probably thought would become a broadcast journalist, but he ended up paving the way for many award-winning sports reporters that came through Broadcast Park. Lawson Tate Cummins was so intelligent at an early age, he graduated high school at the age of 14 and went on to earn his journalism degree from the University of Iowa before becoming the sports editor at the Gazette in 1939. But he wanted to get into radio and practically begged William B. Quarton for a job.
If you hire me, you can can me on 1 minute's notice. And I laughed and hired him.
When Quarton launched Channel 2 in 1953, Tate was right there, hosting the first local show, a coach's show with legendary Hawkeye football coach Forrest Evashevsky. Tate retired from television in the 60s, but still provided his own commentary until his passing in 1984. In the late 60s, Ron Gonder arrived with one goal in mind.
And the thing that really brought me here was the Iowa football and basketball play-by-play.
Gonder called games for decades on radio, and after covering so many forgettable football seasons,
It got a little difficult.
he's really enjoyed the last 40 years.
That was my love, and maybe not a lot of people get to do the thing that they loved as a youngster and wanted to do. I did, so that's pretty special.
After Ron left to focus on radio, Dick Bremer succeeded him as sports director. To this day, he remains the play-by-play announcer for the Minnesota Twins, a job he's now held for more than 40 years. Eastern Iowa native Pete Seifert took the reins for a few years in the 80s before moving on to news. He now serves as a top executive for a media consulting firm. Mike Ducey arrived in the early 90s, just in time for some pretty special years for the Hawkeyes.
Being able to cover Hayden Fry Hawkeye teams, as I remember, they had a really good year my first year at Channel 2, then began to slip a little bit. But Hayden Fry came to Iowa while I was in college.
Ron Gonder recalls the initial thoughts on Fry after so many years of losing.
Well, let's see what this guy can do. Is he just another guy in the line of coaches who's going to extend this non-winning streak?
After 19 losing seasons, he did end that streak, sending Iowa to the Rose Bowl. On the basketball court in the 90s, Ducey covered one of the darkest days for Iowa athletics in 1993.
You know, I think of the Chris Street tragedy and that terrible night and the way that Tom Davis guided the Hawkeyes through those unprecedented times that followed. Those are some stories that I'll never forget.
Now, after decades covering the Cowboys and Mavericks and others in Dallas, Ducey got the chance to showcase his Hawkeye fandom recently, thanks to the return of the Hawkeye women to the Final Four.
Actually interviewed Caitlin Clark in the days leading up to that Final Four appearance, and to get together with a lot of great Hawkeyes here in Texas.
In the early 2000s, it was Chris Miller's turn to take the reins for a few years.
People always ask me, they're like, "You worked in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. What was that like?" And I said, some of the most honest and genuine people you'll ever meet, because they'll tell you exactly how they feel. You don't have to wonder how they're feeling. They'll tell you. And, you know, part of that fabric of the Midwest, I always hold near and dear with me every day.
Chris is now the play-by-play announcer for the Washington Wizards, a dream job for the kid from North Carolina. Jared Aaron spent a decade at Broadcast Park and enjoyed some of the access the job provides for a true sports fan.
When you have the press pass, you have that access of just being able to say, hey, that game sounds kind of cool, I'll go to that.
Unlike Gonder and others before him, Jared enjoyed consistent success by the Hawkeyes.
I think while I was there was only 1 year where they didn't go to a bowl game, from 2004 up until just before the 2014 season. They were always good. Sometimes they were great, but they were never bad.
Along with watching some of the unexpected giants of the sports world that got their start here in Iowa, including Kurt Warner and Zach Johnson.
You know, kind of being on the Zach Johnson train, if you will, before he won the Masters, and really loving to watch his career grow and then flourish into what it became.
Today, sports coverage is a lot different than just telling people what happened. Nearly instant highlights and a desire for analysis around the clock has today's sports team not just reporting during newscasts, but podcasts as well.
Compared to the days when I was here, it's died and gone to heaven for a sports fan like me.
Welcome to the control room here at Broadcast Park, where our wonderful technical crew puts on air everything that we work on at all hours of the day. You know, a room like this sees a lot of changes over 70 years, and we're excited about another change coming in the near future that will benefit you, Next Generation Television.
Our current digital standard is almost 30 years old, and it was very limited in what it allowed the broadcaster to actually broadcast.
Right now, our signal provides you with over-the-air access to live television in high definition. But for more than a decade, thousands of Eastern Iowans have bought TVs that can do a whole lot more. So now, we will soon do the same with an ATSC 3.0 signal, also known as NextGen TV. 4K resolution and full Dolby surround sound are the main improvements, but the new signal and its ability to transmit data is where it really provides new benefits for you.
If your TV set is off, if you opt in, it will turn your TV set on in case of, severe weather or, some type of other emergency alert.
When NextGen comes to Eastern Iowa in the coming years, KGAN and KFXA over the air, for those with NextGen capable TVs or tuners, will look more like a streaming app.
You could go into the broadcast app anytime during the day, and there's a whole news channel, so to speak, where the same thing that we're putting out on the web, but it could be the whole live newscast that they can pull up and they could watch the newscast.
And we can't wait to share more with you about NextGen TV in the months ahead. That does it for our look back at 70 years here at Broadcast Park. Thank you for joining us. Obviously, there's so much more we wish we could show you. If you'd like to learn more about Leo Greco, Dr. Maximambo, the Iowa Traveler, and so much more, you'll find it right now at iowasnewsnow.com. I'm Nick Weig. On behalf of everyone here at Broadcast Park, thank you for joining us. Good night.